is Betty. I work for SC Justice Group as the Membership Growth and Wellness Coordinator. I am also the fellow for TPW's Women's Committee, and I love this position. I love working with TPW. I love working with you. So this is an honor for me and a pleasure. So who's giving this? Who is TPW? Everybody wants to know. Everybody's asking, who's TPW? Glad you asked. Let me tell you. TPW is a coalition of formerly incarcerated leaders and 85 community-based organizations in California. Our mission is to ensure that all people living in California prisons have access to meaningful, high-quality programs and to accelerate the impact of recent sentencing reforms toward our North Star goal of decarceration. We advocate for divestment from punitive systems and investment in community-based healing practices and have recently launched a pilot chapter in New York, which we spoke of. So we know who TPW is, but who's giving this training today? Who's like saying, what's informed? What's trauma-informed facilitation? That would be TPW's Women's Committee. The TPW Women's Committee is composed of individuals and organizations who are committed to bringing equitable access to programs in California women's prisons. In addition to the offering of training like this one, the Women's Committee has led multiple projects. For example, we recently surveyed incarcerated women in California prisons regarding their needs for program. Here's a few quotes directly from what they put into their surveys. Caitlin, could you please read a few quotes for us?
Yeah, I'm assuming folks are able to see what I just shared on my screen. So these are quotes directly from folks incarcerated in women's prisons in California who we surveyed, really about the impact of community-run healing programs. So I'll read these. These groups give me the ambition I need to want to do better and to want better and to do better, excuse me. They promote hope, self-exploration, understanding, values, and new directions. They all have broadened my thinking and helped me see that my choices affect not only me, but everyone around me and the community as a whole. I'm being able to open up and to speak on how I feel and how I want and what I want in life. Doing these groups, along with other self-help groups, has truly changed the person that I am today. Gaining insight and understanding of myself and others helped me to understand the changes I need to make to better myself. I am so thankful. And finally, we love this one. They made me see that I am lovable and worthy of real love.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I read quite a few of the surveys, and it was just amazing how reaching out to them in that way and allowing them to express themselves made a big difference with them. I think that they felt seen and heard, and most of all, held. So, next step from that, what do we do now? Well, if you want to join our Women's Committee, please attend our next meeting. It is on June 5th.
Oh, did they close our account?
Huh?
I think if folks can mute themselves,
Okay.
that'd be great.
It's June 5th, and I'm going to drop it in the chat. I'm going to drop the link in the chat so you can pre-register. If you'd like to join us, we would love you to join us. And I really believe that that you will get a great, particularly if you are facilitating, whether you're facilitating in a women's prisons or not. I think the information would be good, but if you're interested, please pre-register with the link that I just dropped in the chat, and we'd love to have you.
Are males invited?
Pardon me? Oh, of course. You can be a male and join our women's committee because
Well, thank you very much.
yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so now an overview of what we're going to do today. Today, we have put together a training for you all about trauma-informed facilitation in women's prisons. We'll kick things off with the grounding to get present in the space. We'll talk about the critical importance of understanding trauma in prison settings. We'll talk about some definitions like what is trauma? And we'll practice grounding and coping exercises that you can use in your groups. We'll use breakout rooms twice to work in small groups to discuss how trauma shows up in your programs, in your groups inside, in your classes inside, and to practice trauma-informed grounding techniques. Let's get to it. So I want to bring Priscilla. Hi, Priscilla. I'm going to pass it to you so that you can get us grounded and present.
Thank you, Miss Betty. Hi, everyone. My name is Priscilla. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, native lands of the Kumeyaay people, and I am with Prison Yoga Project. And I'm so honored to have been invited to begin this training today with the grounding, with the centering. So I invite you to get into a comfortable seat. If there's any adjustments that you need to make, I also invite you to leave your cameras on or off if that feels like you can get more into kind of a mindful state. Like the intention right now is to invite you to go into your internal landscape, and I invite you to close your eyes or soften your gaze and just bring your intention into grounding or centering and what that means for you. For me, that means leaning back into my chair. That means closing my eyes if that's accessible. It's usually accompanied with a big sigh. During the day, there's a lot of going from here and there, either physically or mentally, with all the work, jumping from task to task. And so the intention right now is to be in this moment, be in this present moment, in your body, in your space, and in this virtual space together. And just taking a moment to notice what it feels like in your body to try to be in this present moment. And if your mind comes up with things that are outside of this present moment in the past or future, allow those moments to pass by, like the sounds of the street, things that we may not be able to control, and just let them pass. And if you find that your breath wants to come out, your exhale wants to come out with a little more volume, please allow that to happen. And just allow your breath to be in a natural state and just notice what that means for you in this moment. And I invite you to tilt your head up on your inhale and tuck your chin into your chest on your exhale. Inhale with your chin up. Exhaling, your chin tucking to your chest. And just doing a couple of rounds of this at your own pace. Do one more. We'll continue with doing this side to side, inhaling to one side, exhaling to the other side. And these larger movements can be helpful to bring your focus and awareness to different parts of your body. Bringing your awareness to your breath can feel a little abstract if, it's not something that you do on a regular basis, if it's not something that your participants do on a regular basis. So incorporating something like your head and your neck along with the breath can be helpful. And I invite you to bring your head back to center, bringing your hands to your chest. I'll lower my camera in case you're watching. 1 or 2 hands to your chest and doing a little self-massage, a little self-touch. And noticing the way your chest rises and falls on your inhales and your exhales. And maybe noticing how your rib cage expands and contracts. And then I invite you to bring your hands together in a clasping way. It doesn't have to be a strong clasp, just a light clasp. And just as we are in this virtual space, perhaps imagining that we are together in person in a circle in this space. We all do this similar work together. We all have a heart for compassion and healing and working within our communities and with each other. And even though we're in this virtual space, we can do this together and imagine that we are in this space together. And if you have your eyes closed, I invite you to open them gently. Or if your gaze was softened, bringing your gaze back to your screen, returning to this space. And just to bring us all back together, I invite you to do a big inhale, bringing your shoulders up, maybe clenching your fists, getting real tight, maybe putting your arms all the way up and letting a big sigh out. Maybe shaking it out a little bit so we're not stuck in a dazed, sleepy way, ready to join in and take in what this amazing group has brought together. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Miss Betty. Thank you, Caitlin, TPW.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. I didn't even know I needed that so much, but it really did help because it's been a long day already, and here we are. So thank you for getting us present and grounded for the next things to come. So I have an ask of everyone right now. What I'm going to ask is that everyone take these next couple of seconds and put in the chat your name and your organization. So if we could just all do that, I'm going to take a couple of breaths while you do it. It shouldn't take you that long. You know your name and who you work for. I'm hoping. Okay, but I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that. And thank you so much. We want to make sure that we know and honor everyone present. Okay, so thank you, Priscilla. We ready to go now. Y'all ready to go? Let's go. Okay, here we go. So why do we do these training sessions for participants and facilitators? Why do we do it? Because it's important that we take care of ourselves and that we at least have in our minds when things come up, ways to do so. ways to respond to them. What we know to be true is that in prison, any prison, there's trauma. And the trauma just doesn't start with them being in prison. The trauma probably started a long ago, maybe even to childhood. We don't know. But what we know is that trauma was probably already a part of their lives. We've all experienced trauma. So when you get to prison, you have trauma, and now you have trauma on top of trauma, because you have officers talking to you any kind of way, yelling at you, telling you what to do, slamming those doors. And I want you to know that I am a formerly incarcerated person. And when they slam those doors and lock those doors at night, it used to like scare me to death, because I thought it was gunshots. That's how it sounds. That's how that metal on metal sounds. And so that was traumatizing for me. And there's so many different traumas, like strip searches. It's so many different traumas that's already packed on top of traumas. So what we have to believe when we come into the prisons facilitating is that we're looking at traumatized folk. The other part is, as facilitators coming in, we're traumatized too. We have our own stuff. So that's why it's important that we talk about participants and facilitators and understand trauma, understanding trauma and what it looks like in our women inside. I believe that trauma shows up in so many different ways inside. There's high levels of trauma among women and non-binary folks. Trauma before incarceration, abusive relationships, childhood sexual abuse, trauma for non-binary folks who experience the same things out and it's compounded once in. Slamming doors that sound like shots, like gunshots. Women choose to deal with the environment in different ways. Every woman isn't going to experience trauma in the same way. So let's talk about a couple of ways that trauma showed up, that I have seen trauma show up inside. One example I have is, I call it a healing class. When I went to it, I don't know what they called it. They might have called it some life skill, something. They may have called it something. But for me, what it was a healing class. What I saw was a participant was sharing. She didn't share a lot, but when she shared from her heart. So she was sharing some truth that had been internal until now. Another person in the group is triggered by the story because it hits home for them. And this person begins to shout at the person who's sharing that nobody wants to hear that mess, to shut up. Now the group is picking sides and it's getting loud and a little bit violent. So what happened was the facilitator froze. The facilitator froze, and because she was a brown card, there wasn't a sponsor in the room with her. And so I stepped in to help her. And so the way that I did that is I was just like, all right, everybody freeze. Everybody freeze and take a breath. Let's breathe. So in that, I was able to regather them. And then after we took a couple of breaths and just like got grounded again and it settled down somewhat, I was like, we're not here to harm each other. We're here to support each other. And went on like that. And so the facilitator was then able to take some breaths with us. and come back to the group also and move towards grounding the group again. Now, how do you get the room back together? Was that, okay, that was an example of how I've seen it happen. Now, another example is a participant is shut down, perhaps in a freeze or flight activation. They are sitting slumped over and feel emotionally collapsed. They rarely participate in groups. Do we use the same response for this participant, or do we use another way of responding? So I just told you how I responded to trauma in the group. And it sounds good for that one. It worked for that one. But is that the go-to? Or do we have other ways to deal with different phases of trauma? Trauma shows up differently for different people. Like this person wasn't shouting or anything. She was just shut down. And you could clearly see that. So what response do you use for her? Do we use the same one? Or is there a better one or another one? Or do we have multiple ways of doing it? To discuss this, I'm going to pass it over to Ms. Stephanie Covington, who is going to give us some more information on this and maybe some insight on the use of responses. Stephanie?
Thank you, Ms. Betty. I'm going to share my screen and bring up some. We know that all of you are facilitating different kinds of groups inside the facility. And first, I'll also introduce myself. I'm Stephanie Covington, and I'm the co-director of the Center for Gender and Justice. We provide a number of different trauma-focused programs in both CIW and CCWF. And we also provide trauma-focused interventions in the men's facilities, Pelican Bay, Corcoran, and Tehachapi. So certainly trauma-informed is a word that everybody has heard. It's become a major buzzword. But I believe that when we're doing trauma work, there's 3 levels to the work. So trauma-informed to me is the things we need to know. It's information. The things that we did in our first training, the things we're going to learn and discuss in this, our second training. Trauma responsive is what we need to do. So regardless of what kind of group you might be running inside the facilities, we want to be trauma responsive. We want to think about our policies as agencies, the practices we're using inside, the environment and the culture that we're creating within the programs we're facilitating. Because we certainly know that prison per se is not a trauma responsive environment. That is difficult for us to change and control. But we do have some ability to be trauma responsive inside the groups and the programs we're running. And then trauma specific are the kinds of services, the trauma focused interventions that we actually provide for people who are survivors. And the things I believe that people need to know are the same thing, that prison residents and us as providers need to know the same things. Everybody needs to understand the process of trauma, what actually happens when there's a traumatic event, and understand the differences, the gender differences. There are many people who've had trauma in their life, have had abuse in their life, and they actually wouldn't label it that. They wouldn't call it that. They actually don't know it is that because it may have been so common in their family or in their community. They just think that's what happens to everybody. So understanding the process and knowing what it is important. Understanding the common reactions. It's important for us as staff and program providers to understand this, but it's also really important for the folks that we're working with to understand this. I've had people say to me, post-traumatic stress disorder? You mean there's a name for this? I've been hiding this for years. I just thought I was crazy. So very important for people to understand what are some of the common reactions. And then developing coping skills. And those are some of the things we're focusing on in the training today, those grounding exercises, the coping skills that we have as providers, but we also teach those that we're working with so that we can expand their coping skills also. So Miss Betty started talking about this. Why is this so important? Well, because it's so pervasive for those who are living inside prisons, but also because abuse and trauma, they impact how people think, what we call cognition, how people think. It impacts how people feel, their affect, and it impacts behavior, including their interactions for others. So if someone has experienced trauma, their thinking's been impacted, their feelings have been impacted, their behavior's been impacted, and sometimes they don't realize that part of what's happening to them is really because of something that's happened previously. So it's important for us to understand and for all those we serve to understand. Now, because it impacts how people think and feel and behave, if we can understand these effects, then it's easier for us to interact with people in a way that encourages their participation in their own recovery and healing and helps them help others. So it's kind of a trickle-down effect. We're going to be learning, we teach others to learn, and then they teach others also. So let's look at what is the process of trauma. What happens here? Well, first there's an event. Trauma is what happens to somebody when they experience an event that overwhelms their capacity to cope, that their physical and psychological coping skills, what they usually use, does not work. And so now they're overwhelmed and they can't cope with it. And that's why we teach more coping skills that are focused on working with trauma. And traumatic events can come from all kinds of places. It can come in childhood, adolescence, in a whole variety of different ways. And as Miss Betty said, and then we have people who've experienced, most people who've experienced trauma earlier come into a system, a prison system, which is also can create another kind of traumatic experience. And then there are the initial responses to trauma. And this is where we hear about the fight, flight, freezer response. I think it can be a process that how people respond initially. And they have changes in their brain and their consciousness, body sensations. They may have numbing, that's psychological numbing or physical numbing. There's hypervigilance, and that's where people are always scanning the environment, just checking out, am I safe? What's going on here? So there's this scanning of the environment. There can be hyperarousal, and that's where the body's revved up. And one way to think about this, one of the trauma theory people says, imagine time when you were driving, you were sitting in a car and the ignition was turned on, but the car was in park. And by accident, you put your foot on the accelerator. So the car's in park, but you put your foot on the accelerator and the car makes this awful noise. You think, oh, what did I do to my car? So that's the body of the trauma survivor. Part of it's shut down and part of it's revved up. And that's how the body begins to break down. Okay? So there's a piece with the body in trauma. And so a person develops a sensitized nervous system, changes in the brain and the brain chemistry and how the brain functions. And then there can be some form of either physical or psychological distress. It can be a current stressor, like coming into prison, like being arrested, having to deal with immigration, domestic violence. It can be a current thing happening in one's life, or it can be a reminder of the trauma. And this is what we call a trigger or an activator. We also call these a threat cue. And this is something outside. It could be a sight, a sound, a smell, a person, a behavior, something that reminds the person who's had trauma of the event, and they're flooded by feelings that belong to the event that happened in the past. So you can think about how frightening it could be to be in the here and now and have feelings that belong back here. and not understand why this is happening to you. So these triggers or activators. And the criminal justice system itself is set up with a lot of different kinds of triggers. The restraints, the handcuffs, isolation, the patent cavity searches. Miss Betty mentioned the loud noises and the yelling that goes on, right? And any kind of threat from a staff member, from another resident. So you can see we have people who've experienced these events in the past coming into a system that's traumatic just in how it operates. And so that's why it's also really important, as Miss Betty was saying, think about not just the people we're serving, but all of us that go on into the inside. Those of you who are going inside and running your programs, you're also in this environment. And whether it feels like it or not, there are ways that you are being impacted. It's a toxic environment. And so how do people respond? Sometimes they're responses that come mentally or emotionally. Betty talked about someone who got agitated and upset, somebody else who was shut down. And these occur in what I call the inner self. We have an inner self, which are thoughts, feelings, values, beliefs, what's inside of us. There can be external responses, and those are those physical reactions that happen in the body and in our behavior. Okay, so responses can happen in different ways in different places. And so we can see off there on the right of this chart some of the emotional and physical responses that often happen. There are what we call the retreat responses, which would also be our mental health responses. When people isolate, when they dissociate, which is a mind-body split. And you know this. I'm sure you have been facilitating a group at some point, and you just noticed somebody was eyes were glazed over, and they're physically in the group, but you know they're not present. And that's dissociation. People learn dissociation very often as children. If they're being abused as a child, they leave their body, so they're not totally experiencing the abuse. And then we see this also happening in adults. They leave their body, eyes are glazed over, and you just have a sense their energy isn't there. Okay. Depression, anxiety, those are the retreat responses. The harmful behavior to self, this is where I put the substance use disorders, eating disorders, the self-harm, and the suicide attempts and action. We have harmful behavior to others, which is another kind of behavior that's associated with trauma. And this is where we see the aggression, the violence and rages. And then we see the physical health issues because the body is impacted by trauma. And we see the lung disease, heart disease, autoimmune diseases, diabetes, a whole range of different kinds of health issues. And part of the problem is all these things I have listed on the right. Think about it. We have mental health services, some that still don't deal with trauma. We have suicide prevention, doesn't talk about trauma. We have substance use disorder programs. Some of them don't talk about trauma. We have people self-harming. Is the facility dealing with trauma? We have anger management programs. They don't talk about trauma. And we have a physical health care system that often doesn't discuss trauma. So you can see why sometimes our services aren't particularly effective. So here's a list of just some typical feelings that a trauma survivor could feel, right? And one of the ways to think about this is to think about things on a continuum. And if you think about feelings on a continuum, very often trauma survivors are at either end of the continuum, right? So they can be numb and shut down, or they can be filled with anger. They can be feeling nothing, or they can be feeling a lot of anxiety. So just think about ranges, all the various kinds of feelings. And we see the same thing when we think about behavior. We very often see behavior on a range, right? Someone is very quiet. Somebody else is really aggressive. Somebody's behavior is they can't sleep. Another person, they can't wake up. So again, thinking about continuums, we often, as I said, see people on the end of continuums. And we need to talk about gender when we talk about trauma. It's not the same in terms of risk and responses. There are different risks and different responses from folks. In childhood, boys and girls are at equal risk, physical and sexual abuse, and it's from people they know, not from strangers, regardless of what people say. It's from family members and people they know. We begin to see a change in adolescence. For young men, their greatest risk comes from people who dislike them or hate them. So a boy is at greater risk if he's gay, if he's a young man of color, if he's a gang member, or if he's transitioning. And the people who harm him are often the police or his peers. But contrast this to the teenage girl. Her greatest risk is from the person to whom she's saying, I love you. Her greatest risk is in her relationships. If we look at adult life, if a man serves in the military, his greatest risk comes from the enemy. If he's living in the free world in our communities, his greatest risk of harm is being a victim of crime committed by a stranger. Contrast that to the woman. If she serves in the military, her greatest risk for harm comes from those she's serving with. And if she's living in our communities, her greatest risk for harm, again, comes from her relationships. And for the LGBTQ population, and for our gender non-conforming folks, they're at the highest risk for harm. They're at the highest risk for harm in our communities, and they're at the highest risk for harm in the justice system itself. These are those 5 core values that you want to have in your groups for being trauma-informed and trauma-responsive: safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment. These are key ingredients. I'm going to share with you 2 coping exercises. And this one, the first one we're going to do is the here and now exercise. And the reason we do this type of an exercise, remember when I said if somebody's triggered or activated, they're often pushed back in time, flooded by the feelings that belong to an earlier time and place. So a lot of the exercises that we do in order to help people cope are called grounding exercises, and it's to bring someone into the here and now, into this particular time and place. And so I'm going to ask you to do this one with me. This is not one where you close your eyes. And you'll notice Priscilla, she offered us choices, by the way. When you're working with trauma survivors and you want them to close your eyes or lower their eyelids, you give them a choice. Close your eyes, lower your eyelids, find a focal point, just like she gave us. Now in this exercise, you'll keep your eyes open. So if you just take a deep breath and relax your body. And I'd like you just to look at the room around you that you're in. And just focus on the size of the room. Just notice the size of the room. And then focus on the color and the texture of the walls in the space you're in. And then notice the height of the ceiling. What kind of lights are in the room? Maybe there are windows. You see any windows in the room you're in? Notice the doors, the furniture. And then just think of today's date, what time it is. Think of what city you're in. And then just focus on yourself. Think of your name, your age, and just take a deep breath. So I think you can tell by doing this exercise, it gets you into this moment. It gets you into this time and place. And this is why it can be really useful for someone who's experienced a trigger. Now, the next exercise is just a little bit different. This again, you'll see how this one works. This one, we're going to close your eyes, or as I said, you'll lower your eyelids or just find a focal point in front of you. Okay? But I'd like you to sit comfortably with your back straight and close your eyes if you're comfortable, or lower your eyelids. And just take a few deep breaths while you're counting to 4. Just get your breath relaxed. And then if you hold your hands up in front of you with your palms up. So hold your hands gently in front of you with your palms up. And I want you to imagine that you're holding all of the negative or upsetting thoughts or feelings you've had today. Just think about the things that have been difficult for you today, thoughts and feelings, and hold those in your hands. Now I'd like you to turn your palms down and imagining you're emptying your hands of all the things you've been carrying around today. You're letting go of all the challenging things you've been carrying around today. Just keep breathing slowly. Now turn your palms up again. And now your palms are open to receive all of the positive energy, the positive thoughts, all of the positive things that are in our world. And your palms are here open to receive support and help and love. And now just slowly open your eyes. Okay. So again, it's another way to help someone shift their focus from wherever they've been to doing this particular kind of exercise. So now you've got 2 different types of what we would consider coping exercises or grounding exercises. So I'm just going to close by telling you about my latest project you might be interested in. I just literally finished a book called Hidden Healers. It's the unexpected ways that women survive prison by helping each other. And I interviewed 22 women, and the majority of them were at CCWF or CIW. So it's very much the stories of women who've been in our California prisons. So I thank you for having me spend time with you today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of our presentation.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was great. We won't have time to do everyone, but can I get 2 or 3 bold groups in the house?
I will.
Okay, Chaplain James, you got 2 minutes to share about what your group did. And then Susan and Sophia, I got you. You're next.
Okay, we talked about fluidity, being fluid in a group. It would being fluid in a group is better than like saying rigid or solid. Like, let's say a person said that they come in all prepared and everything sometimes, and then they have to throw that out because it went a different way. And most of us said it's better to be fluid. I believe it's better to be fluid, so you can go anyway because groups really run themselves. You know what I'm saying? So you be fluid and prepared to go whatever way it does than being sturdy and rigid and in a box, like say. Okay, that's what we talked about.
Thank you. Sophia, I'm going to go to you. And Susan, I'm like, did you take your hand down because you changed your mind or you still want to go? Go, Sophia, and Susan, you're next.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophia, and my team wanted me to share more specifically one experience that I had. This was one of the first prisons that I visited. Maximum security, the correctional officers were definitely intimidating me, even made comments that I was going to get stabbed by trying to even run like a informational session with a group of men that hadn't had programming in over a year. And so given everything that was happening at the time, we knew that something was about to happen. I still led group, and I acknowledged like the fears that I had for myself privately. And I allowed myself then to kind of strategize and ground myself in what I knew, which was I could use like a visualizing tool or exercise to utilize the space. And so what I did, to give more context, we weren't even allowed to have chairs in our space. They had removed all of the chairs. So I already knew, because of the tense situation that we were in, that we were probably going to end up on the floor. But I then took that situation. I allowed all of our program participants I literally said, we're going to put on our hat of 5-year-olds, and today's the first day of kindergarten. So what do we do on the first day of kindergarten? We're all going to sit on the ground. We're going to sit on the rug. And so everybody walked into the space as 5-year-olds, and the transformation that I saw in these grown men becoming 5-year-olds is so enduring and powerful. It was very beautiful to experience. That didn't take away the tense moment that we were living, because we knew that something was happening right in back of us. So then I grounded myself in the other technique that I use, which is narrating behavior. And I started acknowledging that I started noticing that some of the participants were joining their eyes, or how like certain sounds were activating them. And then to kind of bring it together, I used the tool of redirection, which to me, I was able to ground it on the curriculum that I was providing, or the lesson plan of the day, and using, like metaphors and using other grounding activities. We were able to discuss how those realities that they're experiencing and the survival skills that were evident in the class were things that we knew were part of their reality. And yet at the same time, being a program that is coming here to talk about entrepreneurship, how can we use what was happening in that moment to talk about redirection and focusing? The other thing too is that I also am very mindful of my gender, and I am representing women. I present as a woman. And I knew that there were other dynamics that were at play. So, for example, the correctional officers were trying to intimidate me. And again, they were saying that if I was in between our participants, that I was actually going to get stabbed. So I went ahead and stabbed myself next to the most intimidating looking participants, to give a message to the correctional officers, to also our program participants, to let them know that I felt safe with them. Because I knew that if I felt safe, I had an opportunity then to create a safe vibe amongst the group. The information session ended. Definitely there was an incident that had happened like a couple of yards behind us. But when all the men got up and they took off their 5-year-old hats, we had created such a safe space that at the end of the day, that class was known to actually change the culture of the yards and the dynamic that they had with correctional officers.
Thank you. That's awesome. That is really awesome. Thank you. Susan, I want to bring you in if you want to chat.
Yes, I put it down because I didn't want to forget to put it down.
Oh, okay.
So we came from two different perspectives. There are three. Well, we came from different perspectives, but we utilized what's around us at the time of dealing with trauma. And when I was inside for 31 years, so I ran groups, as did a couple of other my friends that are here, and we learned how to read the room. We knew how to engage the room. Like with me, when I had a group that didn't want to, like, everybody was just silent and staring at you, I would love to. I used to throw a debate question out, and then it would get the room just started. I kept on for a little bit just to say, but wait a minute, what about, so it made it a good full 2 hour of talking, and everybody coming together at the end, and, with me saying, hey, that was just an exercise of getting you to talk. But to keep, or when, people come to us to mentor, that they need mentoring, I would never give them advice per se. I would just listen to their words and repeat their words back to them. So, and let them figure it out. It made it best.
Susan, what you said about a debate topic, are you talking about something current in the news or something from the past?
Well, it was a battered women's group. And so I would say, well, what about this? Or, what about this emotion? What did you feel, and they would say, no, but it was this, and, oh, but wait a minute, what about, so just a little trigger words
Okay.
to then get them to think of really what they're truly, truly feeling and what they really want to get up and out,
Mhm.
not coddling them.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining the first breakout room. We're going to head into our next presentation here, and I'd like to introduce Lauren, who is from Insight Garden Program, and I'm going to pin her. Where are you? There you are. Her video so we can get started. And after Lauren's presentation, we're going to go into our second breakout room to do some additional practice, and then we'll come back together for a debrief and close. Lauren, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caitlin. And thank you everyone for contributing today in various ways. Feeling super excited to be here. Very grateful for this conversation. I think it's super important. As she mentioned, my name is Lauren Beatty. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm joining you from Oaxaca, which is native lands of the Zapotec people. I've been practicing yoga and meditation for about 19 years now, and I have been a yoga instructor for around 3.5 years. I am also in a master's program focusing on consciousness and human potential. So that being said, let's go ahead and pull up the slides. Caitlin, would you mind sharing those?
Yes, I forgot that was my job. One moment.
That's okay.
It's going to be great. All right, I found them. Share screen. I'm sharing the PDF. Does that work? Can you see it okay?
Yes. Yes, that's perfect. Can everyone else see it all right? Good. Great. So for sake of time, because these have been some wonderful, lively discussions, I am going to start right here where we're at. So I want to talk about a couple different things. We've talked about some exercises that will help us center and ground ourselves. And we're going to go into a couple more practices that will do the same, that have the same benefit. And I want to first talk about how to incorporate these practices in our facilitation. So we did the palms up, palms down with Stephanie, which was wonderful. I really loved that, as well as the here and now. And I think one of the ways that we can incorporate these wonderful movements that you'll learn with me, as well as breath work, which we'll also go over, and the other exercises, is by creating a routine to either start or end the class with one of these exercises. And I think you can tailor it to whichever one you feel is best for your group. And you just have to use your own intuition and even asking your group what they would like. I think another way that we can incorporate these practices in our facilitation is creating class agreements. We do this in our program at CCWF. We collectively talk about what is an agreement versus a rule. And the difference being the agreement is something we collectively make together to create a safe space. And these agreements can include ways to center the group if we have gone off into a heightened situation, whether that's a call and response or whether that's a humming or getting feedback from your group is, I think, really, really important, which is the next point there, asking for feedback. Those that we facilitate are humans, and they have feelings and they have great ideas. Some of the ideas and the things that we do inside the program at CCWF, where I currently work, is our feedback from the participants themselves. And so engaging in the feedback and allowing them to choose what helps them the most. Is it palms up, palms down? Is it breath work? Do we feel safe enough to close our eyes? How do we feel doing certain body movements? Engaging in conversation is really important. And I think that's a great way to set a safe space and create a beautiful environment for growth and allowing them to feel safe. I think creating check-ins as well during your time together. What we often do is creating every 15, 30 minutes, maybe just random moments of just checking in with everyone, making sure how everyone's doing. And I do that often by offering breath work, which we'll go into in this next portion. So let's go ahead into number 3 there. So breath work is definitely something that I'm sure everyone has heard of. And if not, I'm sure you've heard of breath. And it is what it exactly as it sounds. It is utilizing the breath. When we're triggered, our body releases hormones and in the body, and the sympathetic nervous system, which is what controls our fight, flight, fawn, or freeze, stimulates the adrenaline glands, which triggers the release of adrenaline. So we're in this really heightened state where we're irregulated, we're overstimulated. And the breath is such a powerful tool. It's very accessible, and we can use it to engage our inner world with our physical body. And it can help us become present and slow down enough to understand what is happening or what is coming up for us emotionally. One of the ways that we can do this, and there are many different practices that you can utilize when doing breath work. One of the ways that I like to use, one of the practices I like to use is one that is done through physical touch and breath work. Now, this is an option, and like Stephanie said before, options are great in this in groups, because we want to allow people to make their own decision, like choose your own adventure, choose your own course, do what's best for yourself. So one of the points that we use is the center of our chest. And we do this by holding up our fist. Now, I like to imagine that we're grabbing in all the good energy around us. So you can cue that to the group. You can also offer those around you to negate this completely and just move on to the next portion. So grabbing all the good energy around you, we place our fist in the center of our chest. And we use our fist to gently massage the center of our chest, breathing in and out. And we're going to notice that we're using the top portion of our body as we breathe. Breathing wide, you'll feel this in the side of the ribs, the top portion of the body. And imagine the breath reaching the bottom of both armpits. So it's coming from the top of the chest up into the top of the armpit. And you'll keep massaging the chest, allowing that physical touch as you breathe, breathing wide. And after a few moments, whenever you feel it's right for your group and for yourself, you'll stop the movement, you'll stop the massage, and you'll hold the pressure on the point as you breathe wide. This is just a signaling, loving touch to your body. You can say to yourself in your mind's eye, with your eyes closed or open, I am safe. I am here for myself. I feel my body. I feel my breath. And what we've done is now we've created an anchoring point to ourself and to our breath. And you can breathe until your heart slows, allowing yourself to come to a natural breath. It's less about control, and it's really more about noticing oneself. So this is one practice of breath work I like to do. Again, we can also, like mentioned before, if some people, those who have experienced physical harm, do not like the idea of a fist on one's body. And so giving the option is very important, while others love that feeling of touching oneself and just being connected, again, through that anchor point. The next portion that we'll go through, that I find that is very helpful when we've been triggered, when we are talking about trauma, or when we're in a group where trauma is very much prevalent in the day-to-day life, is somatic movement. And I wanted to first highlight what somatics is. And somatics is a field within bodywork and movement, which studies which emphasizes internal, physical, perception, and experience. So it is bodywork and movement to help anchor oneself to our internal world. And we utilize both. Kind of what Stephanie pointed to in her slides was that we have a lot going on inside of us physically that when trauma comes up, and we don't notice we're clenching, we're holding, we're tightening, we're freezing, we're doing all these actions, these emotions are coming up because we are not connected to ourselves during those moments. And our body is in more of a triggered state, which we're just trying to survive. We're in survival mode. And our autonomic nervous system is provoked, which again, is the nervous system that helps us to feel safe. And one of the things that somatic movement does is it helps us to create vagal tone. And the vagus nerve, without just getting too into it, is a huge part of our autonomic nervous system. And our vagus nerve controls the nervous system. It has a big impact on how we process information and how we respond to the world around us. We sit here in the same space in maybe different spots, but what we see and what we perceive are completely different. We don't share the world in the same way because we have different ways that we were raised, different systems in what we grew up in, and different ways that we react to different stimuli. So that being said, our vagal tone is the biological state that comes from the vagus nerve. Just like we work out our muscles and we strengthen our body to create better alignment for ourselves, for our physical vessel, we tone our muscles. We can also tone our vagus nerve. And we do that by accessing these accessible exercises through breath work and through these 3 steps, which I've offered here today. The first one is called tense and release. And it is by tensing our whole body, you squeeze every muscle inside of you, tense, and then release. Tensing up again, tensing everything, squeezing your palms, tensing everything inside of you, and then releasing. And what this does is activating the muscles. And what we're doing is that we're going to bring our body into homeostasis by activating all the muscles at the same time. So if we've been holding any tension in our neck, in our shoulders, in our arms, we're bringing it all together in the same point. We're tensing and releasing. We're allowing that homeostasis, that balance to happen. The next item is shaking. And this is actually the body's instinctual ways to discharge stress. So if you note, when you're in a heightened situation, when you feel triggered, sometimes your jaw starts chattering, your body starts shaking. You feel maybe it's anger that come up, different emotions are emerging. Our body is trying once again to bring us back to a stable, safe space. So we do this ourselves when we feel triggered by shaking our wrists, shaking our fingers. You can shake your arms, shake your legs. You can literally stand up, shake it out, moving the energy through us. And it actually helps us to discharge the stress. It helps us to signal to the body that we are releasing the energy that is no longer serving us. And the next portion that we can do is swaying. So we can do this with our eyes closed, or we can do it with our eyes open, and you literally just sway back and forth like waves in the ocean. You notice things, you notice the pressure shifting underneath you. You can notice your body breathing in and out. And again, this swaying is another way to allow our body to discharge stress and to bring balance, moving our body. Because what we've done is when we're triggered, we're freezing, we're holding things, we're tightening, we're clenching. We want to allow our body to find that natural way of releasing all that we're holding onto and signaling it, because it's smart that we are safe. At the end of these 3 steps, which I offer you to try with your group: tense, release, shake it out, sway from side to side, pause, eyes open or closed, breathe, and just reflect. What do you feel in your body? And you can do that as many times as you like throughout the day. I'd like to, I think that was the last slide on the movements. Is that right? Okay, yes. So we'll go ahead and I guess Caitlin will move to the breakout rooms.
Yeah, exactly. Let me unpin you and stop my share. All right. Thanks, everyone. So what we're going to do now is pass the mic back over to Lauren to share out a little bit about vicarious trauma and the experiences that you all may have in facilitating in-prison programs, or that you may have gotten during incarceration, et cetera, and talk a little bit about how we can take care of ourselves. So Lauren, take it away.
Thank you so much. I hope you all enjoyed your breakout and trying these exercises and, feeling more centered and grounded as well in this moment. I will go ahead and if you would pull up that slide. Thank you so much again for doing that for me. Just want to make sure that my Wi-Fi stays flowing.
Mhm.
So self-care for vicarious trauma. We have discussed how we ourselves carry trauma. We are not immune to traumatic events that have happened throughout our life, throughout each day. And it's very important that we are holding space for ourselves as well beforehand, in order to
Come on, babe. Look, look. You want to go in there?
If folks can, what?
Oh no.
Hope everyone's okay. If folks can be on mute.
So
dog
yeah.
traumatized. No.
So when we think about self-care, for me, I automatically, and I won't put you in this box, but I think of like someone going to get a massage or getting their nails done. You know, we think self-care as this like thing on Instagram, but it's really about the things that we've talked about already. You know, it's about taking care of our mind and our body as one in unison. And so there are ways to support ourselves while we support others. So healing the healers. And there is a phrase that I really love. It says, we can't serve water from an empty vessel. We all, and I'll repeat that again. We cannot serve water from an empty vessel. So we all have a vessel that we carry each day that contains the empathy, the kindness, the love, the sadness, the joy, all the emotions inside one's body. And we have to make sure that we are continuing to fill ourselves up as well. And it's just like when you're flying on an airplane, they say when it drops down the airbag that you first put the mask on yourself and then the person next to you. We need to also be taking care of ourselves. And there are ways that we can do that. We want to utilize different areas. One being our body. Just like we did earlier with these somatic movements, whether you're shaking, you're dancing, in our great breakout group, we said, oh, it feels like we're dancing, Dancing is a wonderful somatic practice to get, crank on those tunes that you love and get up and start moving around. And let me just tell you, I'm sure you'll have a smile on your face at the end. So get real down with your moves, So yoga is another great thing. Yoga is not just stretching, it's also breath to movement. So you can, which is in the next column there at the bottom, vinyasa yoga. There is yoking your body to your breath, and that really helps you get in tune with yourself and creating space and mindfulness. Tapping, which is just tapping your body. I can't go through each one, but you can Google these. Stretching or giving yourself a hug. Using your breath, so diaphragmatic breathing, conscious connected breathing, the breath work that we utilized earlier. Using your awareness, journaling your thoughts, taking them out from your mind space and putting them onto paper. Meditation, body scan, feel your heartbeat, notice your feet on the ground, notice your hips in your seat, notice yourself. Pay attention to yourself. That's self-care. Other supportive tools would be less caffeine, fresh air, less screen time. Put your body on the earth, lay down on the grass, or sit out in the sun. Enjoy the sunlight, allow your body to get the vitamin D that it needs. These are some ways that you can support yourself as you go and support others. So just a reminder that we want to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves so we don't create burnout, resentment, or decreased vagal tone. So that wonderful vagus nerve that supports us so beautifully. We want to strengthen that muscle as well. And we do it by taking care of ourselves. So each person will need something different. And I hope that these offerings, that you're able to find something or multiple things that you can include in your day-to-day life, even just taking some time in the morning, some time in the evening, pick one or two things, and remind yourself that we can only help others as much as we help ourselves. We have to make sure that we're doing our work as well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lauren. All right, so we've been through a lot of content today, and I would love to pass the mic over to my colleague, Serafine Serrano, who is the membership manager for the TPW, and also a healer. And I would love, Serafine, for you to kind of wrap things up for us and put a bow on it before we move towards closing.
first and foremost, thank you everybody here, for bringing their whole self here. All right. If you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera, as I kind of share some reflections and also close us out with some breath work. All right. But just as we came into this space with intention. So I welcome you to definitely use these remaining minutes to thank yourself. Thank yourself for being here, for experiencing all that you experienced. I will add a little caveat to that. That which may have felt a certain way that may have not necessarily felt good, quote unquote, that which, let's say, may have hurt, please get close to that. We're talking about healing when we're talking about wounds. We're talking about often generational wounds, generational trauma, that didn't begin with us. However, the blessing we have in being alive and being here today is to share this space, to explore within collectively, right? But as we're doing it collectively, we're naturally experiencing things on an individual basis because, as it was said today, we've all had different experiences. We've all had different interpretations of those experiences. So in these closing minutes, I think above all, I just want to reiterate some of the things that were said, but also kind of reference other teachers of mine. A.H. Almas teaches us that our hearts make us human, not our mind, our heart, our connectiveness. If traumas separate us from ourselves, because that's what it does, it fragments us from ourselves. It's our connectiveness that returns us to ourselves, that has the potential to return us to ourselves. All right. So in these 2 hours, I take it we all experience different things, and we're reminded of that wisdom that's already inherent in ourselves, right? Because it is in ourselves. At best, we're mirrors, right? So we remind ourselves of our preciousness, our sacredness, our divine nature. So in these closing 60 seconds, I definitely want to ask you all to take a deep breath, right? Priscilla mentioned it earlier. I love it. Like as if we were there together, because we are actually here together. Take a deep breath, hold it, and exhale. And I'll close us with one of the teachers I just discovered, one of our ancestors that I don't know how I just discovered this ancestor, but it's a quote by Rumi and a reminder to all of us here that you are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. So thank you all for what you do, for bringing your wholeheartedness into the space, into the spaces that you dwell in, that you share of your heart, that you connect, that you feel the reflex of pulling away. Those are our wounds, and that's okay, right? Because they're protecting us. But thank you all for this time. Thank you, Caitlin, Miss Betty, all the teachers. All of you are teachers, and just recognize that something I was taught many years ago that always resonated. When we dare to heal, we are healing for 7 generations of past and 7 generations forward. Thank you all. Appreciate you all. Ashe.
Ashe.
Thank you, Serafine. So we will move here towards closing. I'm going to put into the chat a link to a quick evaluation for you all to fill out. Please go ahead and click that link to open a window on your computer so that you can fill it out. A couple of short questions about your feedback on this session. And I really want to take a moment to thank the folks who pulled this off today. So Miss Betty in particular for planning this event, Stephanie, Lauren, Priscilla, and Seraphine, and for all of our facilitators in the small groups, and for all of our participants, East Coast and West Coast, who joined us this afternoon, this evening. Thank you for being a part. To find out more about the TPW, I'm going to put my email into the chat. Feel free to reach out. And we thank you for your work in prisons and jails. Thanks everyone for being here. And if you'll take a moment to just put a one-word mood check about how you're leaving the meeting today, we would love to see how you're doing.
And y'all fill out the survey. We need that survey for a lot of different